Okay, everybody, we are here with Mariah Sage. She is a family systems coach and an expert on Kunik. She has a background in psychology, and we're very happy to have her for one of our first Ask Me Anythings with a Kunik expert. So thank you so much, Mariah. Would love just a little bit of your background and how you ended up focusing on this as your career, and then we can kind of dig in a little bit further.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here with you guys. So I grew up in the world of personal development, and I've been passionate about working with kids and families basically for as long as I can remember. And so I spent about 10 years working in the childcare industry, and during that time got my degree in psychology. And I sort of didn't know where I was going with it, but I was working with families and I loved being a nanny, and I lived in with a lot of families. And over time, I realized that I kind of had a skill set in helping the families that I worked with to set up household systems and work on communication in their families. And each of the families I worked with kind of started being like, hey, you should do this, you should make this into a business. And so I sort of just fell into it. It was never really my plan, but yeah, I love it so much. So I work with people virtually, and I work in home with people, and I just come in and I help kind of balance family dynamics out, work on communication tools, work on getting really strong relationships with your kids, having fewer breakdowns at home, and kind of everything in that department.
Can you kind of give us, because you're one of our only family systems coaches, which I'm sure is a growing niche of coaching out there. Can you just give us a representative way you'd help a family? Like you pick, one that you recently helped and kind of what their issue was and what your solution was?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just give you an example of a family I've been working with over the last couple of months who I've actually been going in home with this family because they're local, but they have a 4-year-old son who basically they're both working parents, so they're super busy, and they just are having a lot of power struggle and a lot of kind of pushback with their son. And it's like everything from bedtime to what he's going to eat for dinner to asking him to pick up his shoes and put them away is a struggle. And so they're looking to kind of, get out of those patterns and figure out how they can effectively communicate with him and just get more peace and harmony in the household. And then on top of that, we're dealing with kind of some potty training issues, him not wanting to poop in the potty and things like that. So it's can be anything from that to helping families who are having a lot of sibling conflict, for example, and coming in and looking at what are actually the underlying dynamics going on in the family that are playing out into these breakdowns. So rather than treating the symptoms, it's about what's going on underneath the surface that's contributing to these issues.
Cool. So you go in and observe for a period of time and then kind of come up with a game plan for the family to execute.
Yeah, absolutely. So we sit down together, and a big part of my approach is that I really teach people to get their kids involved in the conversation with them about breakdowns. So it's a little bit different because rather than the parents having to sit and solve everything, it's really about getting your kids in there and saying, hey, why isn't this working for you? And what do you need to make this work?
That's awesome. Great. So I know we have limited time. So what we want to do is hop into the questions that the community asked. We briefly talked about this earlier, and so let's just kind of hop in. So we had 2 questions which were fairly interrelated. One from Ricardo Suarez, who asked about tactics on being present when you're home and to avoid thinking about work all the time, which we know is a consistent problem for working parents. And the other interrelated one from David Price was just about screen time. And so it sounds like David comes home, he's still working on his laptop or on his phone and answering emails. And his son, I guess, is also probably addicted to an iPad potentially and sees his father using it. And so, I think David's a little bit worried about the hypocrisy of him being on his phone and working and trying to limit his son. So I guess they're both kind of connected in terms of how can you be present at home in the age of kind of screen time and devices. So I'll let you kind of take that either separately or together, and we can dive in further.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love these questions for a couple of reasons. One is I think that screen time is one of the biggest challenges of modern parents because we don't have an example to look back on how our parents handle these things, because it's so new. So this is something that every single parent is dealing with. And it's a huge struggle to be present with your kids when work is always available and it's just right there on your phone. And so, so one of the things I would say is that, you know, although I think the person who asked the question has a very young child who's maybe 2 years old, and it can feel like maybe a 2-year-old doesn't understand this, but actually that you can trust your kids to really talk to them and be honest with them about the difference between using screens for leisure versus using them for work.
Right.
And so that's not always easy, but it is one step in the process, is just to really be honest with your kids and say, hey, I don't really want to be doing this either, but sometimes I have to. But the other thing would be that it's really important to set up systems for yourself, just like you do for your kids. So in most households today, people have some kind of structure and rules around how much screen time is allowed and what they're allowed to be doing. And so I was just talking to a mom the other day who's really struggling. She has a toddler and an infant right now, and she's really struggling with her phone. And she realized that when she gets on the phone in the morning, that it throws the whole day off because the feeding schedules get off. She's working from home. And so she set up some really basic rules for herself, like, for example, not being on the phone until 10 a.m. So getting up in the morning and just spending those first couple of hours really being present with her kids. And then another pocket later in the day where it's the same thing. And so, of course, it's not always possible, but whenever possible, if you can choose those times to set aside, and it's really just a discipline, you know, it's tough for everybody because screens are so addicting, but it's just that discipline of, it's like a meditation, you know, that's how you have to think of being present with your kids. It's like every single time you want to check out, you have to remind yourself, no, this is what I'm doing right now. This is the one thing I'm doing right now. And there's no like magic trick to it. It's just that discipline of reminding yourself and setting those boundaries for yourself. And if that means you have to put your phone in the other room, you can, but yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I know I'm a big fan of going on to do not disturb mode as much as possible. And I wonder, I actually, a client of yours that, you know, I know, they talked about using a system where they'd have almost like a penalty jar or a penalty box, whatever you want to call it. And so one thing that actually we've done among my friends is that since it's so rare to get together, we actually have a rule where if you're the first person at the dinner table to check your phone, then you're buying dinner.
Yeah.
And so have you come up with any kind of structure like that for families where like there's a penalty for doing something that might, because then everybody's kind of guilty.
I have had a couple of clients who've come up with things like that. The thing that often comes up though is that there tends to be a disconnect between the two parents on there being one parent who kind of has more of a tendency to struggle with this than the other. So the most important thing that I would do is to come in and help kind of mediate a conversation of what can we all agree on here. So if you're going to set up these rules, it's really important that you sit down with your partner and say, okay, what's something that's fair for both of us? And it's not just one person saying, okay, you're on your phone too much, and therefore this is what you have to do, if that makes sense. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
This is really good. We can move on to another question. This one we actually received anonymously, which is always a thing we'll do for our members. If you have questions or concerns, feel free to directly message Liz or I, and we'll always ask an expert or post on your behalf in the community. So this one, it sounds like it's a parent of an 18-month-old, and that child consistently follows her around the kitchen, which is a little bit of a dangerous place potentially, while she's cooking dinner. She finds it incredibly distracting. End result often sounds like is that they're ordering in takeout. And so I guess, are there tactics that you have that, you know, how can you either get your child to participate or do something else and become less of a distraction in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. This is also so common at that age, you know, especially if you're busy and you're at work all day. When you get home and you're trying to cook dinner, of course, your kids want your attention. So, so the first thing would be that kind of goes before this is that I'll talk a little bit about how to get even a young child at 18 months to start playing independently. But the first thing is that the first thing you want to do when you get home, you know, maybe you get a few minutes to yourself to take your shoes off and kind of unwind if you're lucky enough to have some help. But then it's to take, 10 to 15 minutes to really connect with your child first. So set aside a little bit of quality time, and then they can learn to count on the fact that as soon as you get home, they have that little bit of one-on-one time with you to really connect. And that's really going to help with the attention pulling and the nagging and the following around. If every single day they can count on, okay, this 15 minutes is mommy time. And it doesn't have to be a big amount of time, especially at that age. It can be really short. It's just that at that time, going back to our last question, put your phone away, put everything else off your mind, and really connect with your kid and have fun with them for a little bit. And then it's much easier to set the boundary of, okay, now I'm cooking dinner and you're doing something else.
That's,
Oh, sorry.
no, that was super smart. So
Yeah.
you're showing the dedicated attention and kind of setting them up on their path to then play independently while you get your task done.
Exactly, yeah. And so then after you've done that, the best way to start getting kids to play alone, and this really applies to any age, but at 18 months, you have to take it pretty slow. So I would recommend starting this on a day when you're cooking like a super easy dinner. Like, let's say you're making like quesadillas for dinner the first night, okay? Like something that's gonna take you 10 minutes. And you can put your child close by, ideally, and it's great to have like a designated spot. So whether that means they're in their high chair playing with Play-Doh, or they're on a blanket on the floor playing with, some of their other little toys or dolls or whatever. But give them one task, ideally, one thing that they're playing with, and don't overwhelm them by just saying, okay, go over there where your toys are and have fun. So it's better if they have a focused thing that they're working on. And then each time the child gets up and comes back to you and starts following you around the kitchen, you just have to calmly walk them back over to their spot. And, if it's a high chair, that's great because they're kind of locked in. But if it's not, then, take them back over to their area and just say, I know you want to play with me right now. I understand. But right now I'm cooking dinner and you're playing with your toys. And then you just walk back away. And
Right.
so you basically just have to do that over and over and over again and have a lot of patience for the first several days. But the more you do this consistently, the more the child will learn to engage and play by themselves.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, especially if you can figure out things that are like small projects, right? So they can feel like ownership and accomplishment in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you have to start small, especially at this age. So the first night, like I would have the expectation, using a timer is a great trick here. First night, it's 5 minutes. If they get 5 minutes by themselves, that's a huge win at 18 months, right? And then the next night, it's 7 minutes. And then you build up to, ideally an 18-month-old can be able to play alone for a good 20 minutes once you really start to build this skill. So yeah.
That sounds like my headspace meditation practice.
Yeah. Exactly, similar concept.
5 minutes apart sometimes. Awesome. That was a really good one. One other one. This is from Jean. She has two boys, it sounds like, and a new baby. So how do you think about the, balancing attention and the sibling dynamics, and then also potential jealousy for the new baby or that's on the way when it comes home? So that attention, I guess, is a huge constraint for many.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so with that, one of the things I would immediately go back to is the power of that quality time. So this is something that I really encourage parents to do. It's one of the first things that I ask parents to start doing with their kids when we start working together. Because ultimately, anytime you want to make changes in behavior or anything along those lines in your family, you have to start by really focusing on being connected with your kids. And so the jealousy basically comes down to the children wanting your attention. And so if possible, if you can schedule, so I don't know how old her older boys are, but if you can schedule some, you don't know. So if you can schedule some regularly scheduled time with them, whether it's 10 minutes at the end of every day, like we talked about, or if it's an hour on the weekend where maybe your partner or a babysitter can take one of the boys and you take the other one, and just spend some time one-on-one with them connecting, that can really go a long way, especially when it's regularly scheduled and it becomes something the child knows they can count on. So that's the first thing I would do. And then the other thing that I'd like to talk about that. I think not everybody necessarily agrees with, but I think is a really important point is that um, there's a lot of focus on treating your kids the same, like making sure everybody gets the same, making sure everything's fair. But I don't necessarily think that that's always the best strategy. So one of the things that I really love to talk about with parents is tuning into who your child is and what their individual needs are. And so each kid is so different, and one child might really thrive on that individual one-on-one time, while another child might thrive more on time together with the whole family, for example. And one child might really need the time with you cuddling in bed in the morning, and the other child might need you to take them out and play sports with them. And so it's not about worrying so much about, am I doing the same for each of my kids and are they each getting enough? It's more about looking at each individual child and saying, okay, am I doing the things that this kid needs to feel loved and seen and appreciated? And so when you're really looking at that, then it's, you get out of your head and you get into your knowing of your children, the way that you naturally know who they are. And when you do that, it takes, like, less goes a longer way in that regard.
That makes a ton of sense. I mean, everyone's independent and it is different and has different characteristics that need attention in different ways. So, and obviously between siblings, there's massive difference. I want to piggyback on one more question to that, because this is something that we received from somebody anonymously, which is, I think, somewhat related. But this parent has a toddler who's extremely excited about a new sister, but is a little bit potentially rough with that new sister because they don't know quite how to play. So this could also been related to Jean's question as well. So when you're introducing this new baby to the household, to the siblings, how do you kind of make sure they know how to treat the baby, like, safely?
Yeah, that can be a really tough and also very common issue to deal with. In the beginning months, depending on the temperament of your child, a lot of the time it does just take that constant attention and just really having your eyes on them all the time. But one tool that's pretty simple that I think really helps with this is to help put that older child in the position of being a helper. So young kids, especially toddlers, really want to feel useful. Like, they want to feel helpful. They watch you taking care of the baby all the time, and they're looking for a positive way to interact with the baby. And so they don't have the social skills yet to know what that looks like, right? They barely know how to interact with their peers yet. And so if you can give them jobs, this goes a huge, long way, right? So it can be like as simple as, oh, I'm changing the baby's diaper, can you come to the bedroom with me and get the diaper out of the drawer? Or, as you're changing the diaper, ask them to hand you the wipes and things like that.
Right.
And that way you're teaching them, instead of constantly saying no and being like, oh no, don't do that, don't touch them, too rough, be gentle. You get to shift it to giving them a positive thing that they can be doing with the baby.
Yeah, I really like that, like empowerment, and then they feel like they're contributing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that even goes back to, I think that's a lot of your philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, kids want to feel independent at the end of the day, and they want to feel useful and helpful. And I think the same thing can apply to when we talk about the issue with the baby who's wanting to help in the kitchen or who's wanting mom's attention while she's in the kitchen. Just recently I was working with a mom who told me she worked with her little boy, and they were cooking together, and she asked him to just pull the grapes off of the stems while she was cooking, right? So it's such a simple task, but he feels so important when he gets to do that.
I mean, that definitely plays to me. I mean, I remember growing up helping in the kitchen all the time, and I love to cook now, and they're definitely related. I would start with really tiny things, and I would probably hate to pull off the stems off the grape.
Yeah, right, exactly. So things you don't want to do anyway, ideally.
All those red grapes will be perfectly plucked. This was great. I want to be very mindful of our time with you. But thank you so much for your time. This was a great Ask Me Anything, and we got into a number of good ones. We definitely would love to have you back. I know that we want to pick your brain even more. So if you're open to it, we'd love to do that. To all our members, Mariah's always available to answer questions, and of course to do one-on-ones. She's based in Austin, but does a lot of work virtually, which I know would be probably applicable to most of our community, because at this point, we don't have a massive presence in Austin. But thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
We'll do it again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.